Hello there! Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And I'm so delighted you've joined me for a story tonight, because I've got a lovely story for you. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. Paulette Palmer was trying her level best to be stoic, but bravery and courage appeared to have abandoned her this morning, as her puffy face covered in pink splotches that no makeup could conceal, revealed how devastated this mother was, for it is not every day when you have to bury your young baby, 2 days after she's been born. Athel, her very sombre-looking husband, stood devotedly by her side, with his back as straight as a pencil, his jaw tightly clenched, while his hand pressed on the arch of his wife's back, as he gently guided her to the front of the pew of the cemetery chapel, followed by their 2 almost grown-up children, 19-year-old Boyd and 22-year-old Chloe, who very silently followed their parents to the front pew, preserved especially for family members of the bereaved. Paulette wondered privately, as she reluctantly sat on the cold, hard wooden stool, with her husband's fingers entwined in hers, whether her life would ever be the same again. There was no doubt in her mind that a beautiful light in her life had been cruelly expunged, rather like a bright shooting star, whose appearance in the night sky is so short-lived. In the beginning it had come as quite the shock for 50-year-old Paulette to discover she was pregnant. She genuinely thought she'd entered the menopause. The unexpected weight gain she had developed in recent months over her middle section was, she believed, the dreaded menopause weight gain. She had been warned about it in women's magazines. Yet when her stomach appeared to become extended beyond the bounds of what would be considered reasonable weight gain, it suddenly occurred to her that she just might be pregnant. And on that day she'd hurried off to the pharmacy to pick up a pregnancy test. And when it revealed she was pregnant, it hit her like a brick across the head. Surely she was too old to be a mother. The pregnancy test did not lie, as the 2 blue lines affirmed it clearly that she was indeed pregnant, and this startling revelation was impossible for her to digest and to get her head around. She was 50, for goodness sake. How had this happened? And furthermore, how would her husband react to the startling, life-altering news? They had believed their days of having children were long since behind them, and now this? She and her husband Athel had been looking forward to going travelling, now that the children were on the verge of leaving home, and had talked about little else. They had dreams of taking a trip on the Orient Express one day, and enjoying a cruise ship experience to Alaska to watch whales. But now she was pregnant. It really had put a spanner in the works. No, this is not what she wanted at this point in her life. She had been there, done that, and got the T-shirt. And she certainly didn't fancy getting back on the same old ride again, like putting a second load of washing in the machine, to repeat yet another cycle. Paulette had been terribly afraid to confide in her husband, to share with him her news. But the doctor's appointment with the family GP, Dr. Erickson, had affirmed that she was long past her first trimester, and yes, she was indeed pregnant, with a bun now firmly in the oven. "Well, Paulette, what can I say?" said Dr. Erickson, looking at her with an amused twinkle in his eye. "This is not menopause weight gain. Congratulations are in order. You are pregnant, my dear. But I do need to warn you that pregnancies at your age are a lot more challenging. We will, of course, need to do various tests to ensure that the baby is fine. The risks of abnormalities increase in pregnancies in older women, which I'm sure you're well aware of. You will, of course, need to pay close attention to your diet, to your nutritional needs during this pregnancy, to supplement with omega-3 fatty acids and folic acid." Paulette had sat on the news for a couple of days, stewing on it, before she finally had the courage to tell her husband Athel. One night, as they were retiring to bed, she had simply blurted it out. "I'm pregnant, Athel!" And he had cracked up laughing at her, his face crumpling up with amusement. "Don't laugh, Athel. I'm being deadly serious. Really, I am pregnant." Her husband looked over from his side of the bed to see if there was any twitching on his wife's lips to suggest she was pulling his leg, but he was surprised to see that she was being deadly serious. His wife was obviously a brilliant actress, or she was in fact telling him the truth. The latter did not bear thinking about.
"This is a wind-up, love. You're 50, for goodness sake. Woman at your age
should be in the menopause. Is that what you're going to say to me, love?"
"Well, yes, that's exactly what I'm going to say to you. You told me yourself, love, that you were going through the menopause. You said you had all the classic symptoms. You said your stomach was growing tubby and that you were having frequent hot flushes."
"Well, this so-called menopause weight gain that we're speaking of," said Paulette, patting her tummy. "Well, this little bump I have been carrying around is not weight, actually, Ethel. It's a baby. And as for the hot flushes, I think they might have been psychosomatic, which means they were brought on by my firm conviction that I was going through the menopause, rather like a dog who's experiencing a fake pregnancy. I saw Dr. Erickson the other day, and he confirmed that I was well past my first trimester. Of course, he said at my age, pregnancies are, you know, rather tricky."
"You are really pregnant? And you're only choosing to tell me this now? You knew this a couple of days ago, and you didn't even bother to tell me about this before," said Ethel, looking quite aghast. "How could you keep something like this from me, love? We share everything together. There are no secrets in our relationship. I thought we agreed about this when we first got married."
"Please don't be mad with me, Ethel. I was in shock. I was trying to get my head around it. It's hard to take in, you know. I mean, at my age, the last thing I envisaged was falling pregnant. I mean, we had plans, didn't we, to go travelling. I thought you'd be so bitterly disappointed when I told you about this," she said, patting her stomach. She looked up at Ethel with earnest eyes. "I mean, there was so much we wanted to do, wasn't there? So many places we were eager to visit. And this, well, it's going to put a stop to all that, isn't it?" Ethel ran his hand through his salt and pepper-coloured hair, fixing his steely grey eyes rather soberly on his wife.
"You're pregnant. Wow, this is a turn-up for the books, love. I honestly do not know what to say. This has thrown me for six."
"But you're not cross, are you, Ethel? Please don't be cross with me."
"Of course I'm not cross. We're both in this together. It takes two to tango, doesn't it? I'm just in shock. A baby. Well, this is a really big surprise."
"What shall we do, Ethel? We could put the baby up for adoption after it's born, if you like. I mean, if this jeopardizes all our plans."
"Paulette, listen to yourself. That is never going to happen. No baby of ours is ever going to be adopted. We are not abandoning our baby. Are you insane? What brought this on? Why would you even think for a single moment that I would be remotely happy with somebody else raising our own baby?"
"I was just thinking we're getting old. Too old to be parents, are we not? Maybe somebody else could give our child a better life."
"Of course we're not too old to be parents. We're not geriatric, are we? You hear about it all the time. Older people becoming parents. And sometimes their age and experience make them better parents. They have wisdom behind them. We should be looking on this as a blessing. Yes, I admit it is a surprise. Yes, we need to sit on this for a while before we choose to tell our children. But I think having another child is not a bad thing. I mean, we always wanted to have 3 children, didn't we? We wanted another one after Boyd was born. But you failed to fall pregnant at that time for reasons unknown. We decided it wasn't meant to be, and accepted our fate as you do. Believe me, you tried to get pregnant many times, didn't you? And now it happens out of the blue like this, years later. I believe this is serendipitous. We should celebrate. It's a gift of God. A second chance to be parents again. I'm almost beginning to look forward to it. I quite like the idea," said Ethel, scooping his wife up in his arms and letting out a hearty, full-bodied chuckle. "You're pregnant. I think it's great news. How do you feel about it, love?"
"You know," said Paulette, I'm so glad you want to keep the baby, because so do I. But I never expected to be a mother at 50. But like you, I'm starting to warm to the idea, slowly but surely. It had taken a few days for the couple to get their heads around the idea that Paulette was indeed pregnant, and then they genuinely became excited about the prospect of becoming parents again. Suddenly all their plans to go travelling had lost their alluring gloss, rather like a faded photograph in an album that no longer grabs your attention, and suddenly seems almost inconsequential and unimportant. The world is a magnificently beautiful place, of course it is, and so are fabulous trips on cruise liners and glamorous train journeys, but at the end of the day, in the grand scheme of things, when push finally comes to shove, it's human relationships that are far more important than interesting places dappled across the globe. After a week, the Palmer couple let Boyd and Chloe into their secret. Chloe had looked disgusted when she first learnt about her parents' life-altering news. She wrinkled her perfectly straight nose, sprinkled with freckles in horror, as if the very idea of her mother being pregnant was absolutely repugnant. "This is a joke, is it not? You're so old, Mum. You can't possibly have a baby. Do you and Dad actually still do it at your age? I don't even want to think about that. Yuck!" she said. "I'm 50, Chloe. I'm not completely over the hill, you know, like the old vegetables in the refrigerator you throw out when they're past their sell-by date. I'd still like to think I've got some shelf life left in me, and that I haven't gone off completely yet." "But, Mum, don't you get it? You're old. You don't hear of people having babies at 50. I don't know of anyone your age that is about to have a baby. I hate to say it, but it's ridiculous." "Don't be so mean to Mum," Boyd interjected. "I think it's great, Mum," he said, looking up at her kindly, through generously compassionate eyes, not much different to his father's. He was surreptitiously poking his sister with his elbow, to try and shut her up from saying anything more rudely hurtful. He was well used to Chloe being cutthroat with her tactless words, and his mother did not need thorny, brusque remarks to discourage her along her pregnancy journey. Chloe could be so thoughtless at times, even though under the prickly porcupine barbs of his older sister, he knew she had a heart of gold. But at this moment, when his mother's feelings mattered, the thorns were on full display, and Boyd knew he needed to rein his sister right in. "You don't think I'm too old to have a baby, Boyd, do you?" Paulette asked her son, looking at him for some kind of reassurance. She desperately wanted her children to want the baby growing inside her as much as she now did, and been somewhat taken aback by her daughter's rather aggressive outburst. "You're not old, Mum. Don't listen to Chloe. She thinks everyone over 25 is a dinosaur. I don't even think Granny's old, and she's in her 70s, so you're definitely not old, Mum. And your biological clock seems to agree, otherwise you wouldn't have fallen pregnant, would you? It would be great to have a little brother and sister running around the place. I mean, I never imagined having another sibling. But you know what I think? It'll be great. I'm very happy for you, Mum. Really I am. And yes, the news has taken us aback, but I'm thrilled about it. Chloe has always been a sourpuss, so anything she says, don't pay any attention to it." Chloe glared defiantly at her brother. "I'm being a sourpuss for a very good reason, Boyd. Don't you get it? I think it's so embarrassing that you're pregnant, Mum. I mean, what will people think? I'm sure my girlfriends will think it's absolutely disgusting. Besides, did you and Dad not want to go travelling? I mean, that can't happen now, can it? Now that you've got a baby on the way. Now you're going to have to give that baby all your attention." "We did want to go travelling, Chloe. That is completely true," Athel agreed. "But me and your mother's priorities have completely shifted now. Family has always been everything to us, as you too well know. Your mother's news also came as a bolt out of the blue to me. But having another baby is growing on me every single day, and I'm liking the thought more and more. You and Chloe will have a baby sister or brother, although you might not like the idea now. But after he or she is born, I am quite sure you will be smitten." "I very much doubt that," said Chloe, pulling a face. "Listen to the both of you. It's pathetic. You're acting like a couple of lovesick teenagers. I can't believe you're actually up for this, Dad. You're 52, for God's sake. You're even older than Mum." In the beginning, it had become an adjustment for the family to come around to the idea that Paulette was pregnant. But then in time, after Chloe's friends had told her that it was cool to have a baby sister, and no, they didn't think her mother was an ancient, decrepit fossil from the 6th century AD, it would seem that the thought of having a brother and sister was not so bad after all. And the needle-like barbs of Chloe's previous thorny remarks had become a lot less reactive and appeared to have retracted. To all intents and purposes, by the time Daisy was due to be born, everyone was terribly excited about her arrival, including Chloe herself, who became eager to lay her eyes on her baby sister, as they had been informed by the gynecologist that her mother was expecting a girl. It was 2 days after little Daisy was born that all hell broke loose for the Palmer family, as the fortuitous, unexpected death of little Daisy had come as a bolt out of the blue, even to doctors and staff alike at the hospital, who were completely confounded. They had never seen this coming, as baby Daisy was born a healthy, robust little girl. The Palmer family had been absolutely devastated to learn that little Daisy had been found in her bassinet in the hospital, that was only inches away from her mother's hospital bed, in the maternity ward, extinct of life. One of the nurses had discovered little Daisy's lifeless body when she was about to hand her over to her mother for another feed. She had looked like a fragile porcelain doll, lying there in the bassinet, so utterly beautiful, terribly pale. The autopsy had affirmed that the family's worst fears had come true, that little Daisy had died of sudden death syndrome, which is not as uncommon as one might think among infants, although in Daisy's case the death had happened far sooner than most babies afflicted with this unfortunate condition. In the beginning, Paulette had blamed herself for Daisy's death. "This is my fault," she told her husband Athel. "In the beginning, if you remember, when I fell pregnant, I didn't actually want her, did I? And maybe she felt that on a subconscious level. So she decided to exit this life. She believed she was unwanted and unloved. Babies can pick up their mother's emotions, you know. I do remember reading that somewhere."
"Don't be ridiculous, love,"
said Athel, scooping his devastated wife in his arms, wiping away the tears that were spilling down her cheeks.
"No one wanted this baby more than we did, and you know that. In the beginning, yes, when you first fell pregnant, we were naturally shocked, as anybody else would be in our circumstances, because we were getting on in age. But in no time at all were we not thrilled with the news. Baby Daisy died of SIDS, but it happens, love. This is not our fault by any manner of means, and I want you to believe that because it's true."
As Paulette sat there in the pew, she could not help reflect on how much easier it would have been to have had a miscarriage earlier on in the pregnancy. People all over the world experienced miscarriages, didn't they? And yes, they hurt like hell and were tragic, but it was a lot easier to bounce back from losing an unborn baby that you had never physically held in your arms. After Daisy had been born at a healthy 7 pounds 2 ounces, and Paulette had held the smiling little cherub in her arms, in that moment she felt like the luckiest woman in the world to be a mother again. It had been love at first sight. "She's so perfect, isn't she?" the nurse had said, handing Paulette her baby, wrapped in a white baby blanket. It was true. Daisy had been perfect, with blue eyes, tiny hands, and a full head of black hair. Chloe and Boyd had been equally as smitten by their little sister, and Chloe had taken her mother in her arms and said, "I'm so sorry about all the mean and horrible things I said to you, Mum, when you first fell pregnant. I was a complete brain-dead idiot. Boyd was right about me. I take all the horrible, mean and spiteful things I said to you right back. Sometimes I can spout such poison, Mum. I promise you, Daisy's the best thing I've ever seen, and having a new sister is one of the most wonderful things that has ever happened to me. And this family, I can never remember a time when we've been more happy together." Alas, it would seem the Palmers' rapturous happiness was short-lived, for when the nurse discovered little Daisy lying lifeless in the bassinet, it had pretty much been the beginning of the end for Paulette. As she sat there in the pew, feeling so hopelessly lost, as if her life had been completely vacuum sucked out of her body, Ethel was holding her right hand, and with a tissue in her left hand, she occasionally dabbed the fresh tears that kept spilling down her cheeks that she had no way of being able to stop. The coffin was so small. It was white, covered in a heart-shaped wreath of lilac pink and white flowers. The cemetery chapel was jam-packed with friends and family. The mood was forlorn and downcast, although all the mourners were wearing pink flowers on the outside of their thick winter coats, which no one took off, as the formidable icy weather meant that the cemetery chapel was incredibly cold. It would seem no one had thought to turn up the heat. The little coffin remained in the front of the cemetery chapel, looking so tiny and inconspicuous, but a picture of Daisy had strategically been placed on top of the coffin to remind everyone that little Daisy had been taken from the Palmer family far too soon. There was some tinsel displayed in front of the chapel, along with a beleaguered Christmas tree in the far corner, standing next to a stained-glass window of 2 angels carrying a baby to heaven. The Christmas tree was a rather bleak reminder that this was supposed to be the season of good cheer, although whoever had decorated the tree clearly did not believe this was the case, as its scant decorations did little to revive a flagging Christmas spirit. The 2 Palmer children were as devastated as their parents about the loss of their little sister. Boyd seemed ill-prepared to believe a baby so young, that had brought him so much joy for the 2 days he'd known little Daisy, was now no longer in his life. By all accounts, at 19 years old, Boyd had always been quite an athlete, doing daredevil sports and stunts on the back of his beloved dirt bike. Some of his so-called stunts could have potentially been deadly, but Boyd had never been aware of his own mortality until his baby sister's passing, and now he had begun to realize that life was both precious, short, and incredibly fragile. Furthermore, death appeared to be indiscriminate. It was no respecter of persons, age, or culture. You could be here one day and gone the next, like a flimsy paper boat floating down a river that ends up in a precarious situation and is washed away by the current. This was something he'd never ever appreciated before. The world he'd always viewed as one big happy adventure playground. Now it had lost its gilded allure, for he had learnt from Daisy's fortuitous passing that the universe could be vicious. It could bite you back, and sometimes that bite would not only hurt, but deliver a cruel, callous blow that would have devastating and almost fatal consequences. "It's not fair," he had cried out to his father when little Daisy had died. "Why did this have to happen to us? Why us, Dad?" Ethel had taken his son tenderly in his arms. He had patted his back reassuringly. "Why ever not us, son? What makes our family immune to suffering and grief? Why are we the exception to the rule? I hate to blow your bubble, son, but it doesn't work like that. When we're born, we're always guaranteed one thing in life, and that is we will all die. Some of us tragically leave this planet far too soon. Others leave later. Daisy was not here for very long. But remember what joy she brought us in the 2 days she was alive. Daisy was like some of those precious alpine flowers you get growing on the mountain slopes. They come out just for one day. They cover the mountainside in their bright, alluring colours. And the next day, son, they're gone. Other flowers pop up in their place. But how much beauty does even one precious flower bring to that mountainside? Even though it's short-lived. So when you think of your little sister, think of one of those precious mountain flowers, will you?" "Is that why you called her Daisy?" asked Boyd. "That's exactly why we called her Daisy," said Ethel, managing to put a smile on his face. It hurt him to see how broken both his children were. Of course he was equally devastated, but he had to be strong for the family and lead by example. He knew that come hell or high water, his family was going to get through their grief. They had to. "It's such a pretty name," said Boyd. "But, Dad, I'm so worried about Mum. I mean, we're feeling the devastating effect of Daisy's loss, but it has to be 1,000 times worse for her. She carried Daisy in her womb for 12 months. To lose her like this, I can't imagine what poor Mum is going through. It would have been so much easier on her, and on all of us, if none of this had actually happened.
If Mum had never been pregnant in the first place, because then we would never have to know what we're missing. But little Daisy, she was beautiful, Dad. I remember her squeezing my hand, looking at me through her bright blue eyes. My heart swelled, Dad, like a balloon. I was so proud of my little sister. Chloe was actually crying, she was so happy. But Mum, how is she going to cope, Dad? Your mother is a stronger woman than she looks, Boyd. I can assure you of that. Don't underestimate her resilience. I'm sure she will pull through this. We all will, because we don't have a choice in the matter, do we? We have to move on with our lives, don't we? There are others like your mother, like ourselves, that have also lost babies and young children. And yet they pick up the pieces of their lives and go on. We need to do the same by following their brave example. But Dad, Mum is broken. I don't think she's going to get over this easily. And why did this have to happen over Christmas? It couldn't have been worse timing, could it? I mean, in our house, Christmas will never ever be the same again. We'll always be reminded of our terrible loss. I mean, have we got anything to celebrate anymore? Chloe's already taken all the Christmas decorations down in the house. She's even put the tree in the attic. She says we can't possibly celebrate Christmas this year, with Daisy dead. She said it would be a tasteless thing to do. And Dad, she's right. She doesn't even think we can celebrate the season of good cheer ever again. There's nothing to celebrate, Dad, now that Daisy's gone. Chloe believes the indelible scars of this time of year will never fade for us as a family. It's funny, Dad. Every year at Christmas time, I'd draw up a list of all the things I wanted you and Mum to buy. There were so many things I wanted from the two of you. Skateboards, surfboards, computer games, sweaters, fancy trainers. But now I look on all those obsolete, superfluous things as meaningless, truly meaningless, Dad. I'd give them all up, all those gifts, to have Daisy here with me in a heartbeat. I'd throw my dirt bike into a landfill site, never to see the light of day again, to have her here with us. I know, son, we'd all do exactly the same. Christmas is a challenging time of year for many. Now we have very reluctantly joined that rather exclusive beleaguered club. We are not alone, you know. There are many people just like us that hate Christmas because they lost someone they loved at this consequential time of year. Then, of course, you hear of people who spend Christmas all on their own. They're incredibly lonely. Others who have to work on the days, like doctors and nurses, firemen, people like that. So for many, it's not necessarily a happy time of year. And for us, it has certainly lost its golden halo, and will probably never be quite the same again. But I'm sure little Daisy, wherever she is, would not want us to be miserable at this time of year. And she'd want us to celebrate Christmas again. I'm sure of it.
Boyd nodded his head in agreement.
Well, one thing is for sure. This time of the year has been permanently scarred by her loss. You know, Dad, when Mum first fell pregnant, it came as such a shock to me. But when I held Daisy in my arms for the very first time, and realised that this was my baby sister, I don't think I've ever felt so happy in my entire life. You know what I was thinking, Dad, at the time? No, what were you thinking? I was thinking, Dad, that now little Daisy was in our lives, this would be the very best Christmas ever to celebrate. And now this has to happen,
said Boyd, tears spilling down his cheeks.
Why did this have to happen, Dad?
Athol once again tried to console his son by patting his back.
It's tough for us, son, really it is. But one way or another we'll get through this as a family. I know we will.
Athol knew his son was right. Certainly, without Daisy in their lives, a light had gone out on their Christmas tree that could never be relighted again, for the fuse had been blown, and there wasn't a skilled electrician on the planet that could resolve this problem for them except God himself. A dark cloud had appeared in the sky. The season of goodwill, a season of hope for so many, had now lost its alluring gilded gloss. While Athol believed his family could ultimately pull through their grief, he'd never seen his broken-hearted wife look this fragile. He was grievously concerned about her long-term well-being. Daisy's loss had hit them all hard, but his wife had taken her death particularly badly. She was inconsolable with grief, and Athol had felt helpless in being able to help her, for there were no words or kindly gestures that could bring a smile to her face. He loved the bones of his wife Paulette. She was his best friend in the entire world. How he wished he could wave a magic wand to make all this grief go away, but he could not do that. Athol knew he would fight for the well-being and sanity of his entire family, so that they could survive their tumultuous ordeal. There was a colleague at work he knew very well, who had tragically lost a child in a drowning accident. That man had never been the same again. He used to be the life and soul of the party, well, at the office, that is, but he had faded into obscurity, and these days he never even managed to smile. Athol certainly did not want it to be like that for his family. His first thought was for his family to leave their once happy-go-lucky lives in the green leafy Atlanta suburb. A new start is what the family really needed. He knew Paulette loved the Georgia countryside. When they'd taken a weekend break in the countryside, she always looked at Athol longingly and said, "Oh, I so wish we could live out here, Athol. If we lived here and woke up every morning to spectacular views like this, I guess I would think I'd died and gone to heaven." Athol had just said, "Maybe one day, love, but you know, living out here is not practical with my full-time job in the city. It would be a hefty commute for me, and I haven't got the stamina to manage that. My father used to commute for many years, you know, and it drained the life out of him, it did." Athol realized that in a strange, incongruous way, some good had actually come out of Daisy's fortuitous passing, if that was to be believed. They say when a flower dies, it leaves behind a legacy, usually in the form of seeds, so that new flowers can grow in the place of the old ones that were there before. Athol realized two things. One was that life is far too short. Daisy's sudden death had shown him that, and made him learn the formidably cruel lesson, furiously fast and hard. The second thing he realized was that you needed to grab life with both of your hands to follow your dreams. And if you don't, they might pass you by, like a balloon on the wind, and maybe someone else will grab that balloon instead of you, because they would likely not be foolish enough to let it pass them by. Even as he sat there, on the stone-cold pew in the chapel at the funeral, with the hard wood of the unyielding bench digging uncomfortably into the back of his legs, it was like a light had switched on in his mind so clearly. He knew he needed to fight for his wife, who was crumbling before him like a dilapidated old building falling apart. Some short-sighted people might allow the building to just crash to the ground, but others who cared would rescue it painstakingly, and that was required with his wife. He would put her back together, piece by piece, even if it killed him to do so. He did not want Daisy's death to destroy the woman he loved more than life itself. He would be damned if he would ever allow that to happen. His family needed to heal, and here in this chapel he had never felt more alone, more forsaken, even though he was swaddled on every side generously by the support of friends and family. Athol had reached what he could only describe as a monumental, life-changing decision. It was as if his mind had left behind the chapel and all its mourners, and he'd found himself sucked down a long spinning vortex, floating towards a bright light. And he felt as if he was standing in that light, and suddenly in the light a raw truth was revealed, and he found himself appreciating everything with a crystal clear new clarity, almost like a future life review. So there we are. That is the end of part 1 of our story. Part 2 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then.